Hello, everyone. My name is John Helliker. I'm Dean of Innovation at Sheridan College. I'm going to be moderating this webinar today, which will explore the role that post-secondary institutions can and need to play in addressing the interlinked social, environmental, and economic challenges we're facing at local to global levels. If you have any technical issues, questions for the speakers, or comments throughout the webinar, please enter them in the comment tab to screen right. This is one of a series of webinars as part of International Education Week programming at Sheridan College. An additional webinar in the series, Internationalization and Refugee Education, will take place tomorrow from 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. We'll begin with Sheridan's acknowledgement of the land. As I think about or speak this acknowledgement, I'm reminded that we need all voices and ways of knowing and doing in order to ensure a sustainable world. We acknowledge the land for sustaining us and for providing us with the necessities of life. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty and the Two-Row Wampum Treaty, which emphasize the importance of joint stewardship, peace, and respectful relationships. As we reflect on the land, let us remember that we are all stewards of the land and of each other. We recognize the land on which we gather has been and still is the traditional territory of several Indigenous nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Since time immemorial, numerous Indigenous nations and Indigenous peoples have lived and passed through this territory. Sheridan affirms it is our collective responsibility to honor the land as we honor and respect those who have come before us, those who are here, and those who are yet to come. We are grateful for the opportunity to be learning, working, and thriving on this land. Today on Remembrance Day, we honor the sacrifices made by Canadians in service, including First Nations, Inuit, and Métis veterans. Earlier this week, we also expressed our gratitude for the contributions of Indigenous soldiers on Indigenous Veterans Day. We thank all veterans who have served in order to help ensure our safety and security. As a context for why today's webinar is especially relevant for the Sheridan community, our strategic plan calls for engagement based on intentional impact. The plan links achieving individual potential with collectively finding answers to the tough questions facing our world. In addition, two of the key cornerstones for our internationalization and global connectivity strategy are sustainable development, including the Sustainable Development Goals, and equity, diversity, inclusion, and decolonization. These elements provide a focus for our work, enabling Sheridan students, employees, and faculty to actively relate, engage, and positively impact communities as critical global citizens and changemakers. As for the structure of today's event, we'll start with a short presentation on the establishment of the Peel Regional Center of Expertise on Education for Sustainable Development. Referred to as RCEs for short, Peel RCE is one of approximately 180 RCEs around the world that have been designated by the United Nations University to foster education for sustainable development and local to global impact through collaboration. Sheridan is a partner in the Peel RCE. We're taking the opportunity today to recognize the establishment of the center, but also viewing today as an opportunity to share the knowledge of speakers who have extensive experience and expertise in aspects of sustainability education. For me, and I hope for you as viewers, this is an opportunity to learn from others and to reflect on our own engagement as active participants in sustainability education and sustainable development. The three speakers that will follow the introductory presentation on the Peel RCE represent universities and colleges that are members of a regional center of expertise. From their perspective, they'll consider how post-secondary institutions are empowering learners to develop the capacity to engage in societal transformation while also helping them fulfill their own potential. After a presentation by each of them, we'll have a question and answer period. So as I mentioned, please enter questions and comments in the chat as the webinar proceeds that we'll try to address during the answer period. At the end of the webinar, there will be a few minutes for each of the three speakers to do a short wrap-up reflection on today's conversation. We'll now move to our first speaker. Our introduction to the Peel RCE, which provides a context for Sheridan's engagement as a partner in this new initiative, is being provided by Dr. Sabbir Saiyed, Manager Transportation Systems Planning for the region and main contact for the RCE. Apart from the regional municipality of Peel, Sabbir has enjoyed productive careers at the City of Markham, Regional Municipality of York, Royal Military College of Canada, Kingston, and the Regional Municipality of Ottawa, Carleton. He is currently the Vice Chair of the Transportation Association of Canada's Connected and Automated Vehicle Task Force and Vice Chair of the Integrated Climate Change Committee. Dr. Saiyed, over to you.
Thank you, John, and it's great to see everyone today. So welcome, and I'm very pleased that Sheridan has a campus in city of Mississauga, city of Brampton, and town of Oakville, not too far from region of Peel. So today I will be mentioning about the region of Peel, United Nations Center of Expertise, as John mentioned. Next slide, please, John. So I will be presenting the vision, mission, and goals of Regional Center of Expertise in Peel. I will be also speaking about the collaborations and partners, the governance structure, and the communication strategy that we are developing for RCE Peel. Finally, I will provide an information on RCE work plan, action items, and next steps. Thank you. Next slide, please. So Region of Peel has been designated as a regional center of expertise, as John mentioned, and it has been approved by United Nations Ubuntu Committee. There are 4 RCEs added this year. So Netherlands, USA, Malaysia, and Peel. So we are very happy that Peel is one of those 4 new RCEs that have been approved by our United Nations. And globally, there are 179 RCEs. And as you can see, the region of Peel is very strategically located in Greater Toronto area. So it consists of city of Mississauga, city of Brampton, and town of Caledon. Next slide, please. So region of Peel, just to mention about the region of Peel, it's an upper tier municipality and it is the second largest municipality in Ontario, just after city of Toronto, and 5th largest in Canada. And region of Peel is a partner of is a part of a Greater Toronto area, and we have over 1.4 million residents in Peel. And region of Peel, as I mentioned, consists of city of Mississauga, city of Brampton, and town of Caledon, an excellent mix of urban and rural population. And region of Peel provides services such as health, housing, transportation, water, wastewater, police, and other municipal services. Next slide, please. So just to mention about the RCE Peel vision and mission. So RCE Peel is a collaborative entity whose aim is to create healthy and sustainable community for life. And RCE Peel is a network where we will be working on the programs, opportunities, and educational endeavors that supports sustainable development and sustainable movement of people and goods, climate change resiliency, as well as economic prosperity that contributes to high quality of life. And it should be emphasized that education is a key component of the sustainable development, and it is the one of the cornerstones for the success of RCEPL. Next slide, please. So as you know, there are 17 goals of United Nations for sustainable development, and we are focusing on 8. That doesn't mean that we are not focusing on other goals, but we are focusing on 8, and some of them will be focusing on developing healthy lives or on the sustainable development, building resilience infrastructure. And because we are building infrastructure, for example, transportation, water, wastewater, so we want to build resilient infrastructure. We want to make cities and human settlements safe, resilient, and sustainable. And we also want to take urgent and combat the climate change and its impact. And again, education and sustainable development is a key pillar in influencing the behavioral change and is a powerful tool that can be used to overcome some of the regional challenges. And we will be focusing on the goods movement and sustainable transportation. And that is one of the key component of our RCEPL, that we will be focusing on the sustainable development and sustainable movement of people and goods. Next slide, please. So we are proud that we have many partners, and we are very proud to partner with Sheridan College. And you can see it's a good collection of partnership, and we will be working with several educational institutions, Sheridan included, and we will be also working with several agencies. For example, TRCA, Pembina Institute. We will be working with the private sector such as Loblaws, Muscat Transportation, Supply Chain Canada. So you can see we have an excellent mix of public as well as private sector partners. Next slide, please. So this is the draft governance structure. Uh, and as you can see, region of Peel, along with 3 local municipalities, city of Brampton, city of Mississauga, town of Caledon. We have got Smart Freight Center, we have educational institutions, Sheridan College, plus school boards, and we have other government agencies included. So we will be working with our steering committee, and we will be making sure that we are delivering the work plan and the action items. Next slide, please. We will be developing the communication strategy. And as you can see, this photo is just 100 years old. It is a Queen Street, not too far from your Brampton campus. Um, and you can see now we are the transportation system is evolving, and now you see there will be connected vehicles soon on our roads. So you can see the development that has occurred, and it is our responsibility to make sure that we are developing sustainably, and we are also focusing on all the sustainable development as well as sustainable education and many other initiatives. So you can see we will be developing an excellent communication strategy that focuses on development of media releases plus social media and many other components that will make sure that we are implementing the RCEP's objectives and mandate. Next slide, please. So currently we are developing the RCE work plan with various partners. We'll be focusing on sustainable transportation. We will be also focusing on goods movement, environment, economics, education, equity and social justice, as well as innovation. And many of these action items will be developed for short, medium, and long term. Next slide, please. So as you can see, the education for sustainable development is a key item, and we want to develop collaborative initiatives with our educational partners and the government sector as well as the private sector to ensure youth and lifelong learners to increase their capacity to address and interlink with economic, social, and environmental goals of sustainable development. So we will be working with all of our partners to making sure that we are developing and delivering on the education for sustainable development. Next slide, please. So with this, we are seeking input from various stakeholders. We are developing and finalizing the work plan, and we will be implementing the work plan. With this, I complete my presentation here. And John, over to you.
Thank you, Sabbir. Thank you for this introduction to the PLRCE. I do have a follow-up question for you, actually, based on that last slide. So I'm wondering, as a regional government within this partnership, I know you're playing a leadership level, but as a partner within it, how might you collaborate with schools in the region to provide opportunities for students to engage in sustainability education and sustainable development?
Yeah, John, this is an excellent question. And John, as I mentioned in our slide, that we are very proud to work with our local municipalities, City of Brampton, Mississauga, and Town of Caledon, and all our partners, educational partners. And because we are in the business of providing municipal services, and as I mentioned in my slide, that we are focusing on transportation, paramedic services, health programs, long-term care services, water, wastewater infrastructures that we are providing. So there is a lot of opportunities where we can work with our students who are working on the sustainable side, for example, on the environmental side. social side and economic area. So there are lots of opportunities where we can apply those principles and make sure that they are applicable to the real world life scenarios here.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your presentation. I
Thank you.
appreciate you taking the time to share this information about the PLRCE today. As I mentioned earlier, our three next presenters are all with post-secondary institutions that are partners in a regional center of expertise. The first speaker is Dr. Rahima White from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. Hi, Rahima. Introduction here. Rahima has lived and worked in Scotland, South Africa, Australia, Canada, and Mexico, so has experienced different perspectives of and approaches to sustainability. She joined the University of St. Andrews 15 years ago to establish the programs in sustainable development. Her research focuses on knowledge and sustainable development, governance of natural resources, and sustainability in practice. She is exploring integrative analysis and novel links across these different fields, drawing on her experiences across the natural and social sciences. Much of her recent work involves gathering together academics, practitioners, and policymakers in innovative ways to co-design collaborative solutions to specific sustainability challenges. For the past 2 weeks, she's been involved in discussions and initiatives surrounding COP26, the International Climate Change Summit that's been taking place in Scotland. Over to you, Rahima.
Thank you very much indeed, John. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. There's still a part of my heart is still in Canada. I very much enjoy it there, and I work with colleagues across there, and I'm hoping it won't be too long until we'll be able to travel there again. Okay, so I'm going to be telling you a little bit today about the experiences that we have had in Scotland when we established an RCE, which we call Learning for Sustainability Scotland. So we're going to have a bit of a journey as we go through today. And I'm going to start with, let's just see if I can get these to go down. So I'm going to start with talking a little bit about why we developed a UNU RCE and ESD, and then how we interpret education for sustainable development in our context. And then I'm going to give you some examples from the different sectors with which we're working, and we'll finish with some final reflections. So why should we actually develop a United Nations University Regional Centre of Expertise in Education for Sustainable Development? For us in Scotland, we were drawing on from the success that we had had in the decade of education for sustainable development from 2005 to 2015. At the beginning of that time, it was suggested that we needed a lot of education and capacity building to underpin the progress towards sustainable development. But at the end of the decade, we realized that we still needed to continue this effort. Within Scotland, we're quite a nice size of a nation to be able to work together across different sectors. We have approximately 6 million people from diverse backgrounds. We're connected to our landscape, and we have a sense of community, and increasingly we're seeing diversity in what we actually do. We have a tradition here of strong, broad, grounded education, and we wanted to build on existing partnerships whilst also being able to develop new partnerships with an emphasis on cross-sectoral engagement. So we developed Learning for Sustainability Scotland, and we have 4 different goals, if you like. We weave connections across sectors, so we don't try to be the best within schools, because already people are doing great things there. Already people are doing great things within universities, but we try to link these different sectors together. We also have an emphasis on producing new knowledge and curating materials and resources for people across sectors. We advocate, we have a particularly strong policy voice in some contexts, and we do some project work ourselves, mostly in partnership with members. We have almost 900 members. It tends to go up and down a little bit, and we work with a steering group of elected members, but we can co-opt additional members if we want. So for example, we've co-opted a youth member most recently. We work in task groups. So if there's a particular task that needs to be undertaken, a task group will get together and either run an event or seek funding. We have a secretariat. We have a number of projects and events. As I said, we work with partners. We had a lot of debate at the beginning about what we thought education for sustainable development was, and we have most recently adopted the UNESCO framing from 2020. I won't read it all out to you, it's there in the documents, but the last part says that it's holistic and transformational education, which achieves its purpose by transforming society. And this transformational aspect and moving into transformational action is what we try to focus on. We also have our own ways of interpreting and articulating that. And again, I think having a vision and mission, which is particular to us and the way that we like to see education for sustainable development, has been really useful. Not just the output, but those particular discussions. I'm not going to read all of these, but just to say that we do adhere to the notion of learning for sustainability as our vision of education for sustainable development, not just being about the topics that you teach, but being about the competencies that learners achieve. So that means that if you are running education for sustainable development processes, that you want your learners to be able to learn how to think across systems, to think into the future, to develop critical thinking skills, to be able to think strategically, to collaborate, to be self aware, and to retain an understanding of some of the moral and ethical issues that we are working within. But as well as having these competencies and having frameworks, we retain that sense of hope, that sense of providing knowledge and connection to create better futures, to co create better futures, and using technology, but also drawing on our heritage, very much thinking about intergenerational approaches and our links with nature. We see ESD as being important right the way through the life. So, right the way from early childhood through nursery or kindergarten, through primary and secondary schools, through college and university and the workplace and continuing professional development, and all of the different loops between these different life stages, because they don't always happen in a linear fashion for everyone. We also see that ESD can occur within wider cultural influences. Now, some of those may be the media and the news media, but there are also cultural influences through, for example, creative arts, such as music and art, and some of the cultural norms that we have. And it's really important that we understand that our communities both offer an opportunity for and an engagement with ESD. So let me give you some more specific examples of some of the projects in which we've been working. I'm going to, before doing this, I just want to go back to our theory of education, and education being for socialization to replicate society and culture, for vocation, the skills training, the idea of individuals fulfilling their potential, but also finally this notion of transformational education. And we try to hold these different visions together while saying that ESD is particularly about transformation. We draw a lot on the ideas, for example, from Patrick Geddes, who was a Scot who moved around the world. He ended up in India, and he talked very much about how the head, the heart, and the hands were important in education. We need to feel things and feel our emotions with our heart, but also think clearly with our head and also use our hands in practical ways. So, how does this work across some of the different sectors with which we're most working? So, first of all, I want to talk about schools. And on the left hand side of this slide, you will see the kind of big policy changes that we've made recently. In the middle, you'll see the kinds of networks which have been really important to move to progress ESD. And on the right hand side, some examples of projects. In this context, the big influence has really been the policy change, which said that we developed the concept of learning for sustainability being ESD, outdoor learning, global citizenship combined. It meant that we could get a Vision 2030 to work in schools, and an action plan has now been developed for that. There are some examples I'd like to give in each of these different sectors. So for schools, two examples. The first is the Secret Garden Outdoor Nursery, which is not only an outdoor context in which children aged 3 to 5 spend all of their time outside, but it's also about offering opportunities for unstructured play, for creativity within the woodland setting, and presence, that the facilitators there are trained in mindful processes to be able to hold the children's development in particular ways and to enable those children to really develop resilience. So that's one example that we've found to be a really good example in Scotland that we've worked with. Another example in relation to schools has been that within teacher education, we have now got compulsory learning for sustainability within the professional standards, which means that all teachers training have to learn a little bit about not just the topics, but the pedagogies behind LFS, Learning for Sustainability. And this is also in continuing professional development. In further and higher education, it's perhaps been a little bit slower to get some of the messages across. And again, we have the same format: policy on the left, networks in the middle, projects on the right. And I want to pull out here two important policy aspects. One is the QAA, which is a UK-wide context, which recently developed some guidelines, and our RCE was involved in helping develop the guidelines for ESD at higher education. And the Scottish Funding Council, which provides some of the funding for our universities, was instrumental in ensuring that sustainability was one of the requirements to gain funding. And we work with a number of partners. I'd just like to mention EAUC, which is particularly strong as our partner to help us deliver some of our projects. The QAA guidelines is the example I'd like to bring up in terms of universities. And so the guidelines are available online, and they articulate what education for sustainable development is, and they try to make it attractive not only for those who are teaching environmental aspects, but those who are teaching in the humanities or the creative arts or the social sciences or any of the other sciences, to be able to understand why we have ESD and how they might approach it within different disciplines and different contexts. And it offers a whole range of different resources to help people with either individual academics or program module coordinators or universities to start their progress in this direction. Finally, I'd like to talk about the connecting in communities as a sector. And as I said at the beginning, community is really important to us here in Scotland. And the government has mapped the national performance framework, which is used by local authorities against these sustainable development goals. And that's been really helpful in starting to get things moving from a local authority perspective. But communities themselves have come up with amazing projects, and that's been stimulated by the Climate Challenge Fund. We have a number of networks that are really important, including the SDG Network Scotland. And the example I'd like to bring there is one from my own university. It's a community group, Transition University of St Andrews, which is led by staff and students, and it does really active, creative practical projects such as bike shares, bike skills and bike tools and skill share and edible campus and a whole range of other projects that get people involved, get staff and students and community members involved together. We also, of course, as an RCE, connect globally with the other RCEs around the place. We hope that you'll attend our global RCE conference next week. But we've also engaged with COP. We've engaged with a number of the UN activities, and we have partners all around the world. We're really delighted to be here today, for example. COP26 is the current issue that people are talking about. It's an opportunity. It's also a challenge because people are talking about climate change and not necessarily talking about a just transition, which is what we would like to see, nor talking about the other aspects of sustainable development. And so for us, it's very important that we keep this conversation going. So my final slide today, just some final reflections on what has worked for us. I think each RCE is very individual and will have a very different shape depending on the partners and the context. Our one has allowed us to think across across sectors to be able to advocate with multiple voices and to contribute conceptualization, but also practices of learning for sustainability. We feel like we've made pretty good progress in schools in Scotland with policy, with examples, with project. There's a long way to go, but we have a bigger challenge now to continue this in universities, to work with our community partners. And we have ourselves engaged little with the private sector to date. We are some of our partners have done so more successfully. We do a lot of projects, but we also work in partnership with those mainly to not conflict with our memberships. And we're always open to new conceptual framings, new ways of thinking about this. So we're trying not to be, whilst we have our action plan and a strategy, we try not to be locked in the way we think about these. That's what I'd like to say to you for just now, and I look forward to some questions later on.
Thanks, Rahima. Your remarks have raised questions for me, and I will follow up during the question period. As I mentioned earlier to the audience, if you do have comments or questions for the speakers, please post them in the comments section. As I said, we will be addressing some of those in the session after the three presentations. Next up is Dr. Asaf Zohar. Asaf is an associate professor of business administration at Trent University. He is the founding and current chair of Trent's Sustainability Studies graduate program and the director of Trent's Entrepreneurship and Social Innovation Center. His research and facilitation in the realms of strategy, change, management, and sustainability is focused on the challenges of implementing sustainability initiatives in organizations and communities. His recent work addresses the unique opportunities of implementing sustainability initiatives, including the Sustainable Development Goals, through collaborations between communities, private sector, governments, and non-governmental organizations. These initiatives seek to simultaneously promote economic, social, cultural, and environmental well-being for all stakeholders and community voices. Over to you.
Well, thanks so much for the introduction and the kind words. And it's actually, Rahima, thank you very much for your presentation. And I'd like very much to build on what is being said. There's a lot of interesting similarities, but in particular, what I'd like to spend some time looking at is how we're applying this in university education at Trent University, and how we're doing this in a way that addresses community opportunities and community needs. Next slide, please. So the context through which we engage these issues is this fundamental challenge of our current system under siege, and seeking creative and innovative ways to accelerate the transition out of a mindset that there's this vicious cycle where enterprise in general, when I say enterprise, I mean for profit and non-for-profit, other sectors, are seen as a detriment to social and environmental well-being, especially in the particular case of business. I'm a professor in the School of Business. Government and civil society have always often criticized business, and we see this, I'll talk a little bit about what we see this manifested in COP26 right now, where Rahima is located, that we exacerbate social issues, and that it's always a compromise or a trade-off between what's good for business, what's good for society, and what's good for illusion, what's good for society and the environment. One of the key points of focus that I do want to talk about is, I think one of our fundamental barriers is to dissipate this notion of a trade-off illusion. And that is the persistent sense that there's a trade-off somewhere between economic efficiency, social well-being, and environmental issues that really has been institutionalized in decades of policies and choices, and in particular in cultures of organizing. Next slide, please. And really, this is the context through which we do this. This should be very familiar to most folks. This was traditionally spoken of as a triple bottom line. The notion is this is the terrain of engagement. This is basically where We begin our conversations on sustainability, sustainable development. And for me, this is the context through which we begin to look for breakthroughs in educating for sustainability in higher education. Um, Typically, we view this in terms of people, profit, and planet as being the spheres through which the discourse, the narrative, the ideas get turned into action around sustainability. And I think our first basic fundamental challenge is to get learners and stakeholders' attention away from the fact that this kind of representation inevitably speaks of trade-offs between what's good for community, what's good for economic development, and what's good for environmental issues. So our basic challenge is to introduce learning experiences, pedagogies, ideas, and actions that will transform this into a realm of opportunity and an opportunity to find synergies. Because at its essence, educating for sustainable development basically says that the confluence of the needs and wants of people, communities, and community well-being can find synergies, can be actually escalated, can be increased through economic development, and in fact, together with furthering environmental well-being. There's areas of synergy. Graphically, this is represented by the space in the middle where all three overlap and they find value added in synergy. And that's really our focus in terms of, we begin with very, very simple ideas. And the simple idea is that transferring the idea of trade-offs between these spheres and looking for synergies between these realms. And we do this in a variety of different contexts. Next slide, please. I think it's really, really important. And Rahima, you are there in the eye of the storm in terms of the context. And I think that more than anything else, I hope that people are listening to what's happening in COP, especially in terms of the youth delegates and the youth representatives that are attending there. This is not just an outsurge of an outlier community. This is something that daily we need to embrace as the lived experience of our learners in the classroom. There's a demand, an urgent demand for accountability. There's an urgent demand to create societal and environmental benefits, but not only to do so as a trade-off with enterprise, but to basically, they're coming to higher education demanding answers to how enterprise can actually further societal and environmental benefits. And my argument today is we have to reboot the way we teach and the way we address, from pedagogy to experiential learning, the whole set of issues to basically relate to this fundamental issue of how through our actions can we further societal and environmental benefit. And this is interdisciplinary, and indeed should actually be a catalyst for our rising transdisciplinary inquiry, creating new insights through the intersection of disciplines on these issues. Sustaining the environment through recovery and restoration, and ultimately, it's the issue of angst, and this is what worries me the most. I have students coming in, just like we see in COP, with a great deal of angst. Gen Z, millennials, they share this sense of hopelessness. And that needs, to me, to be replaced with the excitement and the challenge of revitalization that sustainable development and educating for sustainable development needs to bring. Next slide, please. So one of the ways that we do this is we talk about the transformation of enterprise into social enterprise, and the positioning of enterprise as taking on an explicit leadership role in change. So if you will, rather than looking at government level, whether it be national, regional, or local, to actually proactively frame enterprise, taking on a leadership role through promoting social enterprise. And when we talk about social enterprise, it's enterprise that is proactively and explicitly designed to address social and environmental problems. And to argue that this form, it's a form of praxis, it's a form of engagement that is uniquely equipped at this point in history to lead substantive change. We argue that organizations have agency, that they are perhaps the only entity right now. Sadly, we see in COP26 other forms, other institutional forms of organizations quite often take longer than we hope to reach decisions and turn those decisions into action, where we can do that at the level of enterprise. And finally, motivation. Profit and sustainability of enterprises. It provides a strong and powerful, compelling motive that can accelerate rather than inhibit this transformation to sustainability at the local level and on to the global level through different forms of government. It's not a new idea, but it's an exciting idea that I find really goes a long way to addressing the angst and redirecting people to where they can find it. And this to me is the essence. We need to educate for people to find their sphere of influence and what they do on a daily basis and what they learn on a daily basis in higher education towards furthering sustainability. Next slide, please. Thank you. So Rahima, this looks familiar because you as well listed these as a series of core competencies that we need to educate for. And your RCE as well has embraced this. This is, of course, seminal work done by Amina Wyke and her colleagues over the past decade and a half. We have a roadmap. The question is how to actually drive that roadmap. So let's just begin in terms of systems thinking. This in particular is a difficulty for Western society. Thinking in terms of the relationship of natural systems, human systems, and if you will, spiritual systems as well, as interrelated and interconnected, driving forward. This is something that we really do, especially at Trent University, by really embracing the role of what our host communities, our host indigenous communities, to bring new knowledge forms that can really assist us in this journey. I'll elaborate this on some of these other competencies, but if you will, Rahima, you mentioned this as some of the guiding ideas that are driving the RC and their activities with community. For us, this is the formula of transformation of higher education in terms of how do we integrate these ideas throughout educational agendas across all disciplines. How can we at least bring critical mass, bits and pieces into this to rewrite our agenda around what our learning aims are and what is our vision as an institution to make sure that learners emerge with these competencies. So again, it's thinking in terms of iterative loops, not linear relationships between environmental systems, social systems, and cultural systems. Anticipatory thinking, helping folks think beyond, stretching the dimension of time, thinking beyond short-term into midterm and long-term. And of course, our host indigenous communities, in case of Trent University, we are guests of the Anishinaabeg people and Treaty 20 people here in Canada. They define, for example, leadership as something that needs to extend in terms of leaders think in terms of the future of multiple generations. Whereas most students that come into a business program, they're finding challenges in relation to thinking beyond quarterly returns for an enterprise. So extending people's understanding of the dimension of time in relation to actions and initiatives. Next, normative thinking. Ethical concepts of justice, fairness, inclusion, social justice, and responsibility. Integrating that into the mindset is absolutely critical as a point of departure for building together a sustainable world. Of course, strategic thinking, and for me, this is actually the platform, is interpersonal competence. We are challenged in basically giving our learners the tools to engage and to motivate them, to train them into how to collaborate between multiple stakeholders, how to set a context where multiple voices can come together and generate new insights. Sadly, a lot of what I see in COP26 really reflects some of the challenges that we continue to face around this. Is when we get multiple voices in a room, how do we find the way forward in terms of not only acknowledging differences, but building out of those differences to generate new and exciting ideas. Concepts of solidarity. Mark Carney, the former chair of the Bank of England, who is now again playing a prominent role at the level of the United Nations, as well as advising the UK government on issues of sustainability. He defined our fundamental angst, especially in terms of how we address enterprise, is a lack of attention to the fundamental need for social solidarity in enterprise, and that we need to incorporate this at the local level and all the way up to global financial systems, greater solidarity. And he actually positions this as a hallmark of our recovery and being able to launch significant initiatives in terms of finance and assistance of developing countries and more so-called developed countries, especially Western countries. We don't educate for this. We don't educate properly for this. We have to do better. And that's on our agenda. Those interpersonal competencies, in a nutshell, we need better listeners, and we need folks that speak much more clearly so that people with other points of view can hear them better. Next slide, please. What we try to encourage our learners, and I think this is one of our most successful initiatives, in particular in contexts where we work directly with community to further sustainable development goals within our community here in Peterborough. Peterborough has a commitment in terms of its economic development. This is, in recent years, it's been a great victory. We have worked in collaboration with our region and our city to identify SDGs as the catalyst and driver of economic development for the future of the community. We need to teach our students, our learners, to engage people with the message of sustainable development along multiple paths. And this is a very challenging thing to do. Please consider this as a very simple graphic that tries to reflect there are many doors and windows that open into the space, the context of discussions about sustainability and sustainable development. We need to educate for individuals and in particular leaders that will invite people into that room, not only through a single message like sustainability is the right thing to do, but we need to educate them in terms of it is part of a legal requirement, and that is only emerging more strongly every year as we legislate restrictions and requirements for more sustainable modes of practice, in particular with enterprise. It's the cost of doing business that right now everything has changed, especially in terms of Gen Z and millennial demands as brand and reputation and legitimacy, and indeed a license to operate of any enterprise rests on their ability to demonstrate and integrate into their actions and into their brand corporate social responsibility, environment responsibility, and the pursuit of social justice, opportunity to create value, and in particular, an opportunity to avoid destroying value. This, for me, is a template for redesigning business education, which we're in the midst of, is offering multiple points of entry into this conversation and not just a single point of entry. Next slide. So I just want to conclude in terms of, I know that we've experienced a lot of angst, especially over the past 2 weeks, looking at COP22. I actually seek great inspiration, of course, in Sir David Attenborough in his keynote address in launching COP. He talked about we need to be motivated by hope rather than fear. I'd like to think that in higher education, we're well on the way. We have so much work to do, but we're well on the way to offering, especially Gen Z and millennials, an agenda for action, from ideas to action that extends beyond hope, seeking practical ways to do this at a local level. And our educational systems increasingly need to address this explicitly and drawing a straight line between sustainability and local actions where they can see this at the community level, at the organizational level. And that's what we aspire to do at Trent. I thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Asaf. The role of youth within sustainability, the role of community, and the role that different players within the different sectors play is really coming clear in both the presentations by Rahima and you. We appreciate your thoughts and look forward to the question period afterwards. Our final speaker is Dr. Marisol Campos Navarrete from Sheridan College. Marisol is Impact Manager for EDGE, Sheridan's entrepreneurship hub that focuses on support for impact entrepreneurs and social enterprises. She's built a career of over 20 years, successfully designing and coordinating projects focused on social innovation, social ventures, and impact. An industrial engineer with a master's in sustainability and a PhD in Indigenous studies, Marisol has worked with multiple organizations in Latin America, the US, and Canada, designing strategies to explore, design, and implement sustainability practices and collaborative strategies for community well-being focused on economic growth. Marisol enjoys designing and facilitating collaborative cross-sector projects and intercultural dialogue with Indigenous communities, higher education institutions, social enterprises, and international foundations. Over to you, Marisol.
Thank you, John. I'm joining today from the traditional territory of the Michisayi peoples of the Anishinaabe Nation. This place is known as Nogojiwangon and is encompassed by Treaty 20 and the Williams Treaty. I am very happy to be here. We are having the opportunity to weave from the expertise and knowledges from Asaf and Rahima. And I would like to start this presentation by telling you that I am more a practitioner than a researcher or a teacher, although I do enjoy teaching, but I don't really believe in the word teaching, and I'm going to be explaining a bit more about that later. So please, next slide. So we have been listening from Asaf and Rahima a few insights from what is going on in the COP26 and the World Economic Forum. And I think we by now have understood that we do have, as Asaf mentioned, a roadmap, a set of goals that we have in terms of education, and specifically the role of the higher education institutions in transmitting education for sustainable development. So I'm not going to take a lot of time in this slide. Please, the next one. I am going to talk more about my experience in impact-oriented actions from communities, and specifically now at EDGE in my role. EDGE is an innovation hub in Sheridan College, and there are some reflections I would like to share with you today. Please, the next slide. So what we have been looking lately with our founders and practitioners at EDGE, specifically social entrepreneurs and youth, is and the communities and the stakeholders we work with, is that we are right now having two realities going on. We have a big shortage of people that are enterprises that are having troubles including new labor into their enterprise, into their businesses, but at the same time we have highly committed entrepreneurial youth in the context. So how these two right now are really together in the post-COVID-19 pandemic economy, and we have been at EDGE, we have been addressing those issues. So please, the next slide. So I am having troubles looking at the slides from my computer, so give me a second. Okay. Thank you. So I want to speak a bit about what we have been spotting from our members at EDGE, and these are specifically needs that speak from our communities, that are spoken from our communities in terms of what they are, their attitudes towards sustainable development, and how these attitudes have been reflected in their initiatives for social change and sustainable development. So we have a highly committed group of people in addressing the local communities, their local communities' needs. So coming from the global and having this education in sustainability from universities and the context, they are highly oriented to address what is happening immediately around them. Now, in this attitude, the triple bottom line that Asaf was explaining before is really just seen as the bare minimum now. and in any initiative taken forward from the youth and the people that are calling themselves or have potential for change making. They do have this proactiveness for social change and the Jedi principles, the justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and decolonization across every action. And this is not only in the initiatives and not only as a checkpoint that they have in their initiatives, but also as a very integrative, committed value that they have and they bring into the table. So this assertiveness and pushing forward, pushing these values are seen in every action, and not only in creating initiatives, but also in every interaction, social interaction that they have. The higher standards in terms of holistic well-being, so not only having that balance between work and life, but also the spiritual balance and the social life that they have, everything that managing that tension. The new generations are proving to be way more skilled than us in balancing that and bring the proper space for that and making a space for that. The advanced tech literacy that is coming from the new generations too. They were born and raised in technology, and everything now is immersed in that for them. And all of this is really catalyzing this purpose-driven, diverse, and collaborative culture that, more than looking for multi or pluricultural approaches in which we are looking for, having this diversity going on, it's just a means towards this genuine intercultural coexistence and co-creation, which means not only like acknowledging the diversity, but embracing it and then transforming our context based on that. The next one, please. So at EDGE, we have been working really hard in having a centered, membered understanding of what we're doing. And I think one of the main insights that we have been looking at is allowing the students that are coming, the people that are coming to our social innovation hub, guide us in terms of what they are looking for. And the first thing that is happening is this urge, this crave for having this cross-sector collaboration and integrating all of that into our program. So having better strategies to address those emergent needs is something that has been going on and is proving to be the most challenging thing that in transferring this sustainable development and addressing the SDGs need. Second, I wanted also to share with you from the perspectives that I heard today, a bit of a reflection of what can be seen as what we're looking into in the future. So, just give me 1 second here. I have to manage the screens here. So, well, we've been talking about the role of higher education in sustainable development since 1992. The first time in which this role was recognized was the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. And in this summit, the role of university education was highlighted in helping ensure that citizens acquire an appropriate understanding of the problems affecting humanity and critically inquire our relationship to consciousness and emotional intelligence based on solidarity, diversity, empathy, understanding, trust, cooperation, and social organization. But despite all of these efforts, for some time, the conceptualization of sustainability has been limited to only 3 dimensions in the academic sphere: financial, social, and environmental. Thus, traditional theoretical models that limit sustainable development to these 3 dimensions seem insufficient to address this topic in all its complexity. So creating an academic curricula for sustainability not only involves including triple bottom line contents in the syllabus of all subjects, but also promoting an educational paradigm shift, proactively avoiding the traditional bias toward methods that only encourage the reason cognition development, dealing with tasks detached from the reality and from real local and global problems. It is necessary to value emotions, human being affects, and the development of emotional intelligence in our efforts to reach a sustainable society. Thus, education for sustainable development must guide the students' emotional development as well, not only to improve their skills and help them achieve their maximum performance, but to establish the foundations of a more cooperative and compassionate society. In other words, if we want to advance in achieving the sustainable development goals through education, we must also focus on the integration of the holistic nature of human beings, including our emotional aspects. Indigenous peoples have been excelling in transferring these skills since time immemorial, recognizing the holistic, how holistic is a human being, and putting forward those values, not in teaching them, and that's why my belief in the word teach is really not that good, but being us as educators, the environment, the environment creators of this understanding too, like being consistent too from what we are talking about and how we are and how we conduct ourselves with the people we are trying to impact and knowledge transferring and doing the knowledge transfer. All of us researchers with experience in PAR, participatory action research, I am one, but also coming from the global south, we are somewhat familiar with False Borda's approach in this field. And Borda speaks of a feeling, thinking of, or sentimental constant inherent in every human being. And yes, even in researchers and teachers. And that cannot be ignored in this conversation. This is there is a participatory action research approach. And I would like to make a case for a participatory action teaching approach for sustainable development. One that effectively builds educational spaces that nurture students' inherent understanding of sustainability and the SDGs. This understanding coming from their local context and their own struggles. I see this approach as basically taking our personal attitude as scientists and teachers to the realities of the social, economic, and political crisis in which we find ourselves teaching. This implies the convergence of two planes, that of consciousness of the social environmental challenges we're observing, and the knowledge of the theory and concepts applicable of these problems. This point of convergence goes beyond the level of the practical production and transfer of knowledge to touch the level of the interpretation of this knowledge and communication. As researchers and teachers, and me also as a practitioner, we know that these two levels are neither parallel or independent in our practice as educators. They are symbiotic dimensions of the same scientific set. We exert mutual effects in the process of systematization and advancement of knowledge, including knowledge transfer actions such as teaching. For this reason, this commitment action-oriented education, or purpose-driven teaching, as I started calling it, although ideological, does not remain outside the scientific processes of teaching. On the contrary, it enriches and stimulates them. In this line, there is research already advancing these ideas. Studies have shown that emotional intelligence is an essential dimension in the development and management of the emotional competencies required to build sustainable societies. It plays a key role in optimizing a students' academic performance in the classroom through empathy and academic commitment to action. Well, I want to finish with saying that all of these people that we have at EDGE, we work across communities, students from many partners. We are already seeing this knowledge in the people that are coming with us. And it's really more about like teaching about it, being consistent with those discussions, as you know, practitioners in the field, and transferring that through building this environment, but being also participants and very responsible for what we do and reflect as people. I would like to finish with that, and I'm looking forward with the discussion and the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Marisol. I'd like to bring up all three of the speakers now, and we can get into a further discussion of these areas. And I really want to thank all three of you for your openness, your sharing of your expertise and your experiences. One of the things that's come up for me in what you've spoken about is, on one level, there's competencies, there's a system in a sense for addressing education for sustainable development. On the other hand, there's a complexity that can seem at some point daunting, possibly for people. And I think that if we could get in a little bit to the to that area of attitudes, values, skills, and knowledge, that range of aspects of student empowerment that are part of education for sustainable development. How do you address that? Like, how do you look at this from a skills and knowledge standpoint, in the sense that students are progressing in their skills and knowledge in terms of their particular discipline, and now they're also engaging within ESD, education for sustainable development, with the complexity of attitudes and values and systems. I'm just curious in terms of your own perspective on that and any experiences that you have. And if someone would like to volunteer to start, or I can, Asap?
Sure, not a problem. I mean, first of all, this gives me an opportunity to build on some really important points that Marisol has raised in her discussion. First of all, there's a need for us, especially at the level of higher education, on what we mean by teaching. And she began by talking about, what are the skills, what are the competencies? She mentioned emotional intelligence. How do we create the context in classrooms that can move forward, finally, this notion of emotional intelligence, which is just a Western way of talking about a more holistic understanding of what it means to listen to another, what it means to engage another in a meaningful way. Because this crisis is so much a crisis of solidarity among communities. And so I think that's really important when Marisol is talking about aspects that she works on in EDGE at Sheridan College. So much of this is basically looking at generating learning experience outside of traditional coursework, outside of traditional sit at the foot of masters and learn the material, which is the traditional notion of Western teaching type of thing. So it's just accelerated our crisis of relevance. And we have to just really, first of all, align our teaching with adults and how they learn. Adults learn by doing. They don't learn by listening to somebody else tell them what's right. We've known this forever. Jay Gardner has talked about this for decades in terms of, so we've got to reframe that. The other thing I want to really emphasize is all these notions, and of course, I know that Marisol knows this through her lived experience. This is just a sliver of what we've known for centuries from Indigenous knowledges and Indigenous ways of knowing. So those lovely matrices that Rahima, you and I have put forward in terms of core competencies for sustainability, this has been known for millennia by our host Indigenous communities and Indigenous knowledges at a global level, in terms of how do we integrate, have a more holistic understanding of things. So, John, we've got to be more flexible in embracing multiple ways of knowing, bringing that into the conversation, because we need some shortcuts in terms of building community, regional, national, and global solidarity around sustainability issues, because we have to speed up that process. So those Western pedagogy things that Rahima and I just put up, they've been known for Indigenous knowledges. We need to ask those forms of knowing if they can help our Western embedded notions, how we can move forward more quickly, and we need to learn from them.
Hey, thank you, Asaf. Rahima?
I absolutely agree with what both Asaf and Marisol have been saying, that we need these different ways of knowing. But I also hear you, John, when you say it sounds complicated, it sounds very big, it sounds very challenging, it sounds a bit scary to your average person, perhaps, who's just struggling to get through the semester and to do their teaching. How do they start to draw this in? And I think that's where working through the QAA guidelines was very useful to us, to try to keep that broad picture, but then also to offer some insights. And so one of the ways that we can start to support different competencies and different ways of thinking is to offer different pedagogical approaches. And you can do that in classes of all sizes. You can do that through the assessments that you set. So for example, we used to have an assessment where students had to monitor their own carbon footprint and then think about how they might change it, monitor it again, but then just write a reflective essay on what succeeded and what didn't, what they chose to do and why they chose to do the things they did. So in that way, we build in self-reflection, we build in an understanding of science, we build in an understanding of systems thinking, because they have to understand that their transport choices are influenced by the transport system around about them. So small pedagogical changes in terms of assessment can work very well. Pedagogical inputs in seminars, if you have very large class, or in tutorials, if you have very large lectures, but even in large lectures can be influenced. I'm a big believer in the field trip, because then you can go out and talk to people in different contexts and different places. And I think that's a fantastic way to understand. If you have students working individually, but then also working in groups, they can develop interpersonal skills in different kinds of ways. And you can experiment. It can be really fun to experiment with some of these different kinds of pedagogies. You can use drama, you can use role play, you can bring in external speakers. And I think all of those things are not just ESD, they're about good education.
Thank you.
In my case, in my experience, students usually perceive immediately if the person who is trying to transfer this knowledge is genuine and consistent between what is speaking of and how they conduct themselves. I think one thing that I have learned in working with Indigenous communities and Indigenous elders is that the more as a teacher you connect as a human being with the people you are talking to, the easier is to navigate this kind of discussions and transferring, like doing an effective transfer of the experience, not the knowledge, because the knowledge they already have it. It's more our experience and how we, as I said before, interpret of this knowledge. Because when we transfer the knowledge as teacher, it's really an interpretation of what we think of it. The knowledge is there, and then everybody has, their opportunity to do it, and you're just transferring what you are interpreting from it, and there is way more. The teacher is only one means, right? So that doing that personal level connection and allow ourselves as educators to be also humans in front of our students and the people we are, collaborating with beyond teaching, collaborating within this knowledge creation. Is something that I have found as a very good strategy to navigate also the whole system of, the big load of having to submit reports, doing surveys, doing tests, grade the students, doing the marking. I have had seminars of 80 plus students, and the load, the system of the higher education sector is exhausting. When you are trying to be a human being and educate and then connect with your students on top of doing all of those requirements that are needed from us as teachers, it's easy to just disconnect from that humanity and just become yourself like a robot that is just like, talking about these issues. And in my experience, the whole structures around teaching in the higher education sector can be navigated better when you are honest with your students and genuine, and you come forward as the human you are when you're teaching about this. So that would be my experience for that question, John.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, all three of you. Just to remind people in the audience that if you do have questions, please put them into the comment section. But I'll continue here with another question that we have. The question for me that has been raised is that you've talked a lot about communities, local communities, and the role that they play within the work that you do, how essential they are. From an international perspective, what sort of approach do you take to bringing that in so that you have the local to global connections that are so important for sustainable development? And maybe we could start this one with Rahima.
Yeah, I think it's always a really important aspect. So we have I think for all of these questions, they're too big to just address in one way. So we need multiple ways to do that. So many of us in the department in which I teach have worked in the Global South or worked with people from the Global South. And so we are able to draw on some of those experiences. We are increasingly using different kinds of resources for students, and including video, which is one way of getting into the world of those different places. Increasingly, we're getting better at employing more people from diversity of backgrounds. And so in a sense, we're decolonizing our staff and not just our curriculum. And I find that really exciting. So the debates that we're having in the staff common room are also really interesting in that regard. And we encourage the students to speak to each other from their different perspectives, from their different world perspectives, because our students come from over 100 countries all around the world. But also we encourage our students to travel. Obviously, that's been more difficult recently, but we encourage them when they can to work in different places, to visit different places, to be open to different cultural perspectives.
Thank you. And Marisol?
Students are not only students anymore. We are dealing now with, like before, maybe 20 years ago, 10 years ago, they just come to just study. Now we have these highly entrepreneurial entities coming into our classrooms, being multi-diverse, multi-contextual, working in several fields, and not only coming to study, but also putting all of those things into action. And they are craving for having that knowledge being useful immediately. So in terms of in terms of the global from the local, and me, well, I have worked in international and the local, and going across that transition. Something that I keep seeing that is a good strategy is to be ductile and flexible to those emergent needs, and to be a very good listener in terms of connecting again with the students, but also being able to connect with their struggles and hustle outside of the classroom, and then being sufficiently adaptable to have the curricula addressing all of that and speaking all of that is incredibly challenging, but is in connecting in that personal level and doing it again genuinely, like actually taking care of what you're doing. It facilitates that transition, and by doing it, you're also putting the example of how to be more empathetic in front of the people you're talking. Like they learn from that approach too, so it becomes more holistic in that way. So in again, from the international to the local, something that comes forward is always having the space in the educational class space, the space to get to know what is happening with the people you're working with beyond the studies, beyond the curricula. So you present something, but then being sufficient, like having the space for them to also to drive the curricula according to their own needs. Asaf, I don't know if you have something else to add.
I actually really want to build on that in terms of, again, John, we're talking about how we can do this at the level of higher education. Most higher education institutes that I know have had to actually add a structural entity to bridge more readily with the type of learners that Marisol is mentioning. And that's our traditional response to it. But our learners have changed. They've changed in a fundamental way, and they've changed in ambition, they've changed in age group. We have to change accordingly. And I just want to highlight two things that I think are absolutely transformational. Rahima and Marisol have talked about authentic empathy and resonance between higher education and community. I think we need to take it a step further, and we need to ground as much as we possibly can in terms of local community challenges, opportunities, and needs. We have to have our learners move more fluidly, institutionally, structurally, but experientially. Rahima, you're talking about field trips. I think a university education should be 80% field trip and 20% classroom, and we've got it the other way around. And the more they can spend in community, the more the issues become alive. And John, also, I think the less complex it looks. The competencies Rahima and I were listing there look complex in terms of an academic paper. In real life, we experience it every living moment because we have that complexity as being endemic. That's the first thing. The other thing, we have to expose them experientially in terms of ways of knowing that negotiate these challenges and overcome these challenges in ways that are different from what we traditionally do in Western cultures. And I come back to Indigenous knowledges and meaningful engagement with Indigenous communities. There needs to be much more authenticity. We have to be better, especially at higher education, in creating agency for those communities to come in with equal voice and equal power base. And we actually have to be better listeners to their ways of knowing as they bring them in. In pockets where we've done that successfully, there have been very few at Trent, we've had huge successes, and we have to continue doing that, bringing in those new ways of knowing in a way that's meaningful to our students, not just an add-on.
Okay, thank you very much for this. Thank you for your passion and for your expertise that you've been sharing here. We're going to move now to a short wrap up. We're getting to the end of the presentation. So what I'd like to do is to have each of you just some thoughts as we conclude here based upon the conversations that we've had. So I'll start with Sabbir.
Yeah, John, I think this is an excellent webinar going from local to global. And I can mention that for our Peel Regional Center of Expertise, sustainability is key. So we have many partners such as Pearson International Airport, and we are working on many multimodal transportation system where we can link the supply chain from local to the global. And as you can see that there's a seamless transportation system that's required, but it has to be sustainable. And again, the sustainable development is key. And there are many municipal programs that we have that students can see and also visit our website, because there are many job opportunities that are there to apply the learnings that you are getting from this sustainable education. And you can see, as Asaf mentioned, that adults, they do learn from doing. And those are the type of co-op opportunities, the job placements that we are providing in sustainable transportation and other programs at municipal level and with our all levels of public sector as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Marisol?
I would like to highlight my point about beyond the teaching and education, work more towards co-creation and doing it interculturally and collaboratively. I have the immense, I'm so lucky to work at Edge, which is inherently multicultural, but also I have the opportunity to do two things that I love, which is being in front of an audience, sharing knowledge and co-creating knowledge with them, and at the same time working with highly action-oriented, impact-oriented youth and people that really want to make a change in the world, but at the same time, addressing their needs in terms of, bringing food to their tables, paying their bills, and doing so in a way that is not only decent but meaningful. And when I say decent, I think I'm using the Spanish connotation of decente or digno, which is doing it, in across all our values and not only for one, need, but across our values, and being also co-creators and transformers of these reality and those systems that they are entering in. So empower, like giving them the idea that they have the power to transform those systems. And by being consistent and going and taking their values across every action that they do. So that's something that we're trying also to promote at Edge, and we're having incredible results with our members. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rahima?
I think I'd like to just make 2 points at the end. One is a kind of plea. We've talked about all the competencies and all the complexities, but one I think is a plea, coming back to what you started off with, John, is the relationship between people and land, and how the land holds us and we hold the land and we collectively hold the land. And so as an academic, I may call that strong sustainability and an understanding that nature frames the way that we can be on the earth. So nature as teacher, nature as our context, as being one point that I think is really fundamental in education for sustainable development. And the second is that sometimes we're working over the long term, and that we need ways of maintaining hope. And particularly when young people go out and they want to make a change straight away, how can we encourage them to keep hope? And being at COP yesterday, being physically at COP yesterday, yes, some of the discussions are not going to be exactly where we want, and some of the political outcomes may not be exactly where we want. But there's such a vibrant scene on the side, but with NGOs talking to each other. And I saw a hydrogen-powered JCB yesterday, and there are all sorts of private sector innovations and public sector innovations and collectives that are happening. And we need to just keep working on those small steps, and in the long term we will have systems transformation.
Okay, thank you. And Asaf?
Such a wonderful series of concluding comments, and I just want to resonate as well with a comment that Lana just posted from the audience in terms of, you know, what do you tell impact-driven youth about what to expect and what to do in the workforce. And I think we've had kind of a microcosm of what we need to do. I think the first thing we need to do is to continue to amplify the demand and accountability for impact. And we need to actually begin to make them feel they're in the right place when they come to higher education, expecting us to work with that demand for higher impact. Marisol is part of an institution whose mandate is to amplify that demand for impact and to channel it to specific projects. Sabbir, you're mentioning co-op and opportunities. We need to partner better. We need to reflect the same type of excitement that Rahima has witnessed in person in COP in terms of collaboration between sectors. And we need to take a leadership role in higher education to create a context where those students can have positive answers and to feel they're okay by having high demands and bringing their vision and their values into the university, and that the university can actually be a place of relevance for it. And one way of doing that is through being a better collaborator with our host communities, with other sectors, with the workforce, and smoothly directing experiential learning into impact-based contexts like some of the opportunities Sabbir has spoken of.
Thank you, Asaf. Thank all of you for sharing in this very open way, and I really feel impacted myself by the conversation and this conversation about the need for collaboration and partnerships. I mean, you've opened up some possibilities for me in terms of this, and I think that if people can take one thing away from this as an audience, is that if you could just reflect on some of the things that have been said, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a student, whether you're an administrator, you know, in post-secondary, or whether you're part of those other sectors that the speakers have spoken about, I think it's really important to recognize that this is something that we all have to do together, that it is critical, and that there is a way to start. You know, you can start with small steps, but joining together with others is a key to this. So I hope that it's been stimulating for all of you as an audience, as it has been for me. And I also hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.